Hello, YouTube. Did I just want to make a video bringing you episode number 5 of Exploring Every Inch of Sage? Today we have the Roomba episode, also known as Ring of Blades. So, like always, our setup is going to be our core uniques non-corroded. So in this case, we have two setups that we're going to be doing. We're going to have a dual wand setup, using the cleric wands and a Vorax item, as well as a two-handed bow setup with a Death's Touch, which you can see like so. Then we'll obviously again have the Omni Elixir non-corroded, like always. We're going to be on full tier 1 gear with no prices gear. Our character is level 90, and this time around we do have an orange Towering Presence. So basically both of these setups use Towering Presence. You're kind of a bit tight on points when you play this build, because we are going into the Prophet tree to do a Cold Convert. But when you do Cold Convert, you need quite a lot of points in like just various check marks essentially with the Cold build. And because of that, we're quite low on points, so we can't really pick up that many crit nodes. So Towering Presence is just a very easy way to fix our crit. And obviously if you do a Death's Touch bow build with spells, you need Towering Presence to actually have the bow give damage to the spells. Like always, we have no inverse image, and we have level 40 remains with a cheap / early game revival. And you can probably guess what we have here. Like always, we have our good old Elixir skill gain 4 charging progress every second, Elixir effectiveness an empty active slot, or effectiveness at least 2 empty passive skill slots, projectile speed max life. And I did actually roll this for Elixir skill effect. Now, the reason I was doing this is actually partially testing, but this is also just like the best you can do. And the reason for that is the way that Scorpion Distillate works is you basically get like bonus projectiles with Scorpion Distillate. So right now we have 7 projectiles, but if you notice, it sometimes drops down to 6. The reason for that actually is that Scorpion Distillate has a breakpoint at every 50%, or like every 100% starting at 50%. So when you have 349% Elixir effect, you are losing essentially a projectile. But as soon as this goes above 350%, you gain an extra projectile. And I was just like testing around with that and seeing how that works exactly. But the essentially Scorpion Distillate does round up and round down to the extra projectile. So the breakpoints for like every 100% elixir effect, starting from 50%. With that, with the Scorpion Distillate. And then the other memories, we just rolled them. This one hits skill area projectile speed. I will gladly keep projectile speed, and skill area is mostly just for mapping. It doesn't actually give you damage, but it is really nice to get some skill area in this build. It makes your mapping feel quite a lot better. And then lastly, we have projectile speed and spell crit damage. Now, one thing that is kind of problematic with my viewer members is I am very low on crit damage. And because I'm so low on crit damage, that actually did go into my decision to play Towering Presence even when going dual wands. Because getting all of your crit from Towering Presence does allow you to get crit damage on both your bow and on the wands, which is very nice for like scaling your damage early on. Then we have cheap micro medium fates. So for our micros, we just went with int, because int is just like a generic attribute. It's always like fairly cheap early on. Not the cheapest, but not the most expensive. But then for our mediums, we actually went with crit damage. The reason being, micro crit damage kismets tend to be really expensive, but the mediums are like fairly affordable in my opinion, from just what I saw like this league start. And again, we're very low on crit damage in this build, so just getting it everywhere we can just helps scale our damage a lot. Then we have 3 times 2 more corners. So I mentioned before that when you play a cold skill, you have a pretty long checklist of things you need. What you want is you need Convert, you need Cold Infiltration, you need Focus Vesting Generation. Okay, you don't need Focus Vesting Generation, but it's very good. You don't need any of these things, but they're very good to get and pick up. You want to deal Frostbite when dealing cold damage. You also want to get Frail in your build, you also want to get Mark Effect in your build, you also want to get Paralyze in your build, all the usual things. And because of that, that is how a lot of my corners and things are going to be looking, is just getting these check marks. So we have max channel stacks. Ring of Blades is a channeling skill, so the best way to scale it is to get max channel stacks, unfortunately. I did spreadsheet this out. Essentially, up until you have 11 max channel stacks, this is going to be better than even getting plus levels, even if your skill is not level 30 yet. So you're essentially, until you like eventually get like a prairie, you're just going to be stacking as many max channel stacks as possible. So we have max channeled with Paralyze, we have max channeled with Mark Effect, Paralyze, and max channeled with Elixir Skill Effect. Again, the Elixir Skill Effect is because we wanted to reach a breakpoint with Scorpion Distillate. After doing more testing and whatnot with it, I don't think actually reaching that breakpoint is that big of a deal. I'm surprised actually at like how little damage you get per projectile, which when you map it out, it makes sense that it's not that much damage, but I just wasn't sure because I've heard friends tell me that like the projectiles are very important in Ring of Blades and the way it interacts is like usual projectile skills, but at least to me, that doesn't seem to be true. It just seems to be like any other projectile skill where everyone you add is just like the total amount divided by the amount before. So the last projectile you're getting is a 9% additional, which 9% additional is a lot, but you know, it's not the end of the world to not have it. Then both of Fallen Starlights have just max down stacks on them. And for my Goddess of Knowledge Divinity, we just basically went and got the last few check marks. So we have First Convert to Cold, and we have Frail. Just because these are the two things we're missing. I did try rolling this for max channel stacks. I didn't get a max channel stacks, but we got additional damage against frozen enemies, which I'll take it. That's pretty decent. Then we also have a 1-mod pedigree, the good old Gale pedigree. I've been using this pedigree in like every single video so far. I think Gale needs to get fucking absolutely gutted. Like the projectile tag just instantly makes this go 10 times better, thanks to Gale existing, which is not very helpful for the game, because the entire tag is carried by one fucking main talent, and any skill that has the projectile tag is forced into using Gale, which I don't think is very helpful for the game. We are using special canvas supports with tier 1 rolls. Now, the reason for that is quite simple. These two supports were cheaper than the tier 2 rolls, and I just could not in good conscience find any reason to ever buy the tier 2 rolls instead of just buying the tier 1 rolls when the tier 1 rolls are cheaper, or like the same price. So I just went with double T1 rolls for once, which we usually don't do in this video. No activation medium. I don't know how you would even use an activation medium, considering it's a channeling skill. Channeling skills just don't need activation mediums, so yeah. Again, 2 times the precise auras. So we have the good old precise projectiles. Instead of using spell amplification, we are using domain expansion. Domain expansion is a worse skill. Like, domain expansion is worse than spell amplification, but the reason why I'm using it is just for the skill area. It's just nice to have some extra skill area. Realistically, this probably should just be spell amplification, but it doesn't really matter. This happens to be level 21. It's kind of irrelevant. I don't even know why I bought level 21. I think it was just cheaper than buying level 21. I should also mention, there was no level 20 Ring of Blades on the market, so I did buy a level 21 Ring of Blades, because I didn't want to level it from 16 to 20. That just takes too long. And then lastly, all the testing was done with Scorpion Distillate. Now, I did actually later down on the line unequip my Scorpion Distillate just to do some testing without it equipped, and the damage was actually not that much worse, like, at all. I think you could definitely do the setup without Scorpion Distillate early on, and you'll still have very good damage, which is definitely changing my mind a lot, because I'm gonna be honest with you, out of all the skills we've tested so far, this is one of my most enjoyable ones. I really like this setup, I really like this build, and I could definitely see myself, like, wanting to play this on League Certain early on. It's very vibey, it's very chill to play. But we'll get to the gameplay session later. So, doing our base bow setup, we actually had a very impressive 450 billion. And yeah, this is obviously for Death's Touch and bow and Tiring Presence. And equipping instead a priceless bow, which this is the priceless bow that I have. we went up to 1 trillion damage, which is roughly about 2.2 times the damage, which that is really good. But I think something you could also really consider when you have a Price's Bow is, especially on League Sword, once you do upgrade to your Price's Bow, this basic mod right here adds first damage to gear. You might as well just T0 this. It's like not that expensive to do early on, and it has very, very, very high value for you to do it. Because this is just going to increase like the amount of value you're getting from Death's Touch significantly. That being said, I also, after I was done testing out the Death's Touch setup, I did want to do a test with dual wands, so that we have a comparison of wands and bows. So I'm going to talk a bit about my thoughts going into this, and just some of the decisions I made, and how I like came to the conclusions I did. The main reason why I wanted to try out dual wands, and I actually did think going into it already that dual wands would be better, is that you don't really have access to an easy way of getting plus levels from Ring of Blades, especially because all of your like slate points are being spent into max channel stacks. So your Ring of Blades is actually going to be a very low level, whereas wands just naturally give you levels, because obviously in the bow setup you can go plus levels because you're doing the Death's Touch variant. And also, Ring of Blades actually has a very like weak effectiveness of added damage. It doesn't gain nearly as much from added damage as other skills do. 93%, now that is normal for a multi-approach skill such as Ring of Blades to have a lower effectiveness of added damage. But those two things combined make me like just feel a bit on the skill, like maybe this isn't the best way to approach scaling it, or like to try and brute force it. So the big issue that I ran into is what do you do for your gloves? Because Death's Touch, well, that fits in very easily and cleanly into the build. There's no other gloves that really made sense for me. The only thing I could possibly think of would be doing Israfels Laws. Israfels Laws, I think, makes a decent amount of sense. But the issue running with Israfels Laws is it's really difficult to find the focus bestings. Like you're so stuck up on your slate. You have so many mods you need to get in your slates to just fit in the cold convert and all of the, there's so many like check marks that you really have to do there, that getting focus bestings on slate seems very difficult to me. And the only tree you're in that has a focus besting is the Gods of Knowledge tree. So you would have 5 focus bestings and then go Israfels, which, I mean, it's not the worst, but it seemed a bit to me. And no matter how I looked at it, like, I couldn't really find any gloves that made sense to me. The only item that made sense to me is to do a Vorax using a chest item. And there's a few chest items that are, like, interesting. Like, you could maybe do an Israfel Sorrows. 36% int is, like, fairly decent, because you have int on all your gear. And then having the cold damage is, like, whatever, but, it's something. This is probably like an 80% additional multiplier if you have no other flat damage anywhere. But the thing I actually ended up deciding to try and test in this time around was Icebringer's Cage. Now, Icebringer's Cage might not be the best item to do. Realistically, this item is very expensive on League Sword, and it's a bit above like the point of like this series is to have like somewhat more cheaper items, not like super cheap items or things that are like super free or whatever, but generally things are more affordable. There's a reason I don't use Lone Walkers in every single setup, because Lone Walkers is gonna be like a 8k, 10k, 11k FE item depending on like how popular the build is. That being said, though, I did end up using Ice Drinkers, which I think like day 3 these might have been like 4k FE, which that's definitely a bit, I think, too expensive. Which makes me kind of wish that I did an Israfel Sorrows instead, because I think this is like way more affordable. But I do think if you want to try and replicate this, like Israfel Sorrows would also just be fine. That being said, though, I did do Icebringer's Cage, and this is the Vorax I made. So we have Extreme Coldness from Icebringer's Cage. We have the Cage debuff, which is essentially let me just check. I didn't actually check this one. 114 to the power of 4. which is essentially a 70% additional modifier, but then also you take less dot damage, which is quite nice. Now, if we're being realistic, I think numerically speaking, Iceringer's Cage is like not that far off from Israfels Laws. I do think it's going to be a bit better than Israfels Laws, but I already mentioned that like if you have no other flat damage, this added cold is probably like 80% additional. This cage debuff that we're getting is only 68% additional, and then extreme coldness allows us to swap from extreme coldness here to frostbitten. It gives us some frostbite effect, which that's very powerful. It's like 20% additional, the frostbite effect. And it allows us to then run crit damage increase instead of glacial freeze. So I think the Iceringer's Cage Vorax is probably like a 2.2 or 2.3x multiplier, whereas the Israfels Vorax would probably be like a 2x multiplier, or maybe like a 2.1x multiplier. And then obviously, this also comes with the downside that I'm fairly certain for Iceringers, you do need to have a item level 89 or 90 Vorax, which is a bit more tough to find, but I think it is doable, like day 3, day 4. You're probably not getting plus the spell skill level as your base affix though, if we're being reasonable. But like if I'm going to make a Vorax of Iceringer's Cage, I'd probably try to get a base 12 plus the spell skill level. So with that ramble out of the way, our base setup with the wands got to 650 billion. Now, I do want to point out something very interesting about this, is we are running Towering Presence even with the wands. So this adds 100% of the main hand's weapon damage to spells. This essentially is not doing anything right now for us. But what Towering Presence is doing is it's completely fixing our crit. And in the Steel Vanguard tree, there isn't really anything else to take. Like, in theory, you could maybe do Miraculous Touch instead of doing Towering Presence. I just really didn't like the Frost Blinking from Miraculous Touch, because there is a dead zone in Ring of Blades. If you're standing in the middle of an enemy, you're not actually doing damage to them with Ring of Blades. So when I was testing on the dummy, I would just be standing here, like hitting the dummy, and then boom, Frostblink on top. And I have to move away. Frostblink on top, and I have to move away. And I just don't think that's a very fun playstyle. I personally wouldn't like want to play with a skill like that. It would just frustrate me. So I instead just went back to my Towering Presence, which completely fixed my crit rating. Because, you know, wands have a base 500 crit rating, so we're adding 375 base crit. Which, if you think about it, this is essentially the same as, like, going into a tree like Ranger and taking Fluke. You know, it's just like a ton of crit chance. So I don't think it's that bad as a main talent. And with that setup, we were able to get to 650 billion. Now, at this point, I was thinking like, damn, my Vorax is really expensive. How bad would this build be just using T1 gloves? So I crafted some gloves, and the answer is really fucking bad. I'm sorry, but like, gloves is just a terrible, terrible slot. This just does not have any value at all. You're like, there's so... Out of all the slots of gear in this game, gloves and feet are like the two worst ones. Oh my god, this is +1 cold on it. This should have +1 fizz on it. Oh well, we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. But at least with feet, you can get plus skill level on it, even though if you're like dumb like me, you just forget to change it to plus physical level. And because of that, you just lose a ton of damage. Essentially what that means is on every single setup here, you can multiply it by 1.08. So instead of 650 billion, this would be 700 billion damage now. That's neat. That's awesome. But yeah, doing a glove setup instead of a Vorax gloves, we only had 285 billion, which I think for the level of gear is kind of mid. Other setups just do better. I do think, however, like you could instead get Israfels Sorrows, you could do an Israfels Sorrows Vorax, you could do a Israfels Laws gloves, like just buy uncrowed Israfels Laws and then resell them once you have a Vorax. You know, there's other options you could do instead that are just a bit more clean. And then lastly, I tried fitting in a Prices wand. So I crafted just this amazing Prices wand with Armor Pen on it. The reason we do armor pen again is just our build has no base armor pen right now, so this armor pen is essentially like a 40% to 45% more multiplier. 23% armor pen. 23% armor pen is essentially making it that instead of the enemies taking only 70% damage from us, so let's say we do 100 damage, instead of us doing only 70 per hit, we're now doing 99 per hit. So that's a 41% more multiplier, which is why we do armor pen as the prefix. And then everything else here is just fizz levels, cold damage spells, additional spell damage, all that good stuff. And equipping only one plus one, we did get to 1.2 trillion, which is actually very, very respectable. I wasn't expecting this, like, massive of an increase, and I'm still not quite sure why exactly it is that big. Generally, like, equipping a plus one is a massive, you know, it is a fairly big increase, but not to, like, this big of an extent, which I did find to be very strange. And something that is important with Ring of Blades is you do not care at all about cast speed. All that cast speed does is it affects how quickly you get to max channel stacks, which means you are able to take this minus 15% additional cast speed plus 49% additional spell damage modifier, which is by far the best like suffix you can choose from. The only other option would be double damage, but obviously double damage is slightly worse. And then lastly, I went back to the 650 billion setup, and I just unequipped my Scorpion Distillate, as simple as is. And, you know, just not having a flask equipped and testing it out, we still had 440 billion, which losing the Scorpion Distillate made us lose 5 projectiles. So we went down from 12 projectiles to only 7 projectiles. So that is basically half. In theory, that should be half of our damage. But in practice, we actually don't lose that much damage. Which is why I think that like this doesn't have any sort of special projectile scaling like I was told it would have. But yeah, 440 billion of no Scorpion Distillate is pretty reasonable in my mind. I think you could very reasonably do this setup. And like if you don't have your Scorpion Distillate yet, just using like a Swiftness deal. And lastly, let's just go do a mapping showcase so that people can see the build in action. Overall, I will say, at first when I was setting this build up, I was like a bit spooked out, thinking it was going to be completely garbage and like not that good and stuff. And it's like, you know, it's only like really good when you have an insane amount of gear. I was pleasantly surprised at just like how much damage the setup really has. It has so much damage. And it also just has access to like, it has access to a ton of different metrics to scale your gear in. It has access to a ton of damage. And it doesn't feel like you need to have like incredible insane gear from the get-go to be able to play it. It feels like you can swap to this like fairly early into the season and just have a good time. Because, I mean, look at me, dude. I'm just a ROOMBA. I'm a fucking ROOMBA. I love this. This is awesome. Like, this is so totally within my playstyle. I think this is really fun to do. One thing that I will make a note of, though, is max channel stacks. They're not cheap. I mean, we're not anymore in the days of, like, mind control being meta and, like, every single person on the Chinese server going mind control as their league starter, thankfully. But if you, like me, do Q1 league start, you probably know that mind control is one of the better selling slates. So you are going to be paying, like, a pretty penny to get mind control. To get max channel stacks. This is going to be more expensive than buying like a plus level, like a 2 mod plus level corner. At least I think so. Nobody can predict the market changes every season, and you can't really with full certainty know how the market's going to play out. But historically speaking, max channel stacks tend to be on the more pricey side of things. Anyway, YouTube, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative, and I hope the build looks fun. I think the build is very, very fun to play, and I'm quite a big fan of it, actually. With all of that being said, I hope you guys have a lovely, lovely day further, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye-bye, YouTube. Bye-bye. Bye, YouTube. Bye-bye.